Hello and welcome back to the bee vlog. Yes, I'm back out in my messy garage. I should probably do something about it and clean it up. But who has time for that? Yeah. Anyway, today I'm going to be talking about foundationless frames. I got a couple questions on Facebook from Steve and Cardwell about how to get started with foundationless and how to keep the comb straight. I want to first talk about what foundation is. This is what a lot of beekeepers in my area use. It's just a plastic foundation, and that is a thin sheet of plastic that has the honeycomb pattern, the hex pattern embossed on it. Then it's got a thin coating of wax over it so that the bees are attracted to it. I don't like using it for several reasons. First of all, one of the modes of communication for bees is vibration, and the foundation actually inhibits that, and they can tune a foundationless comb to be able to propagate those vibrations, so all the bees in the hive can basically hear what's happening. Second, the wax that's used in foundation comes from other beekeepers, and sorry guys, but I don't trust your wax. The wax that comes from all over the country can have chemicals in it that are either applied by the beekeeper or from the flowers that are being visited by the bees, and the pesticides that are on those flowers, because a lot of these chemicals can be absorbed into the wax and just show up in your hive. Third, I like to allow the bees to draw out whatever size cell they want, and I'm not talking just about small cell, I'm talking about any size. Bees use a variety of sizes of cells in the hive. They can vary not just for the size of the brood and the size of the drone, but also for the honey itself. They'll draw it out actually a little bit bigger so that there's a more efficient use of wax when they're creating the honeycomb. There's another type of foundation, and that's just pure wax. You don't have to get the plastic kind. You can get the wax kind. This doesn't have wires in it, but you can get it where it has wires that are going vertically in it. If you use the wax foundation, it's a good idea to secure it with wires, and it helps to stiffen it and give it more rigidity so that when you put it through a spinning extractor to extract the honey, it doesn't blow out the comb. But even foundationless beekeepers can use this, and I'll show you how today. There are a couple ways to make your frames so that they're foundationless. One is to use a wooden comb guide like I've got here. And I'll show you how I make that. But it's just a piece of wood that acts as a ridge that the bees hang off of, and it helps to keep them going straight. It doesn't work 100% of the time. Sometimes towards the end they'll go a little off track and get a little crooked, but that can be fixed. It's pretty easy to do. Some people will apply wax to this comb guide. I don't bother doing that because it's messy, it's a lot of work, and I don't think it really matters. Another option, and this is where the wax foundation comes in, is to just cut a strip of that wax and put it up along the top here. The first method I'll show you is just the wooden comb guide. This is my preferred method because it's fast and it's cheap. You don't have to buy any extra parts. Most frames come with a little breakout wedge on the bottom side of the top bar. You just break that off, and then I do a little cleanup on it with a chisel. Sometimes with a little burr along here. Just clean that off. You can use a sharp blade too, but this is really the easiest and fastest way to do it. When the wedge was in there, it was lying flat. Now we're going to turn it up on its side at a 90-degree angle. And you can use glue if you want to. You don't have to. I use a little bit of glue just to make sure that it doesn't fall out. Not much. Put the strip in. Then I'm using a brad nailer with 5/8 inch brads. And because 5/8 inch is actually a little bit longer, if not exactly the distance here, I'm going to put them in at a slight angle so that they don't poke out the other side. Only need a few. Watch your fingers, and it's done. That frame is ready to use. The second method is to take that sheet of wax foundation and cut little strips out of it like this. Now if it's cold outside while you're doing this, be careful that the foundation doesn't crack or break. It can get kind of brittle in cold temperatures. This is a medium-sized foundation. It measures 5.5 inches. I can get 7 to 8 strips out of this. You don't have to be perfect with it. I just don't want to have any waste or cut off that's too small to use. So if I want 8 strips and I cut them at about 5/8 of an inch, then I can get them all in there. Once you've got all your strips cut out, it's ready to assemble. Just like before, we're going to break that wedge off the top, do a little cleanup with the chisel. This time, when we assemble it, I'm not going to turn the wedge 90 degrees. I'm going to put it back in flat again. And it's going to be used to clamp this strip of foundation in place. Put it in there nice and tight. Again, with the 5/8 inch brad nails. Give it a good clamp to hold that foundation in. These can go in straight. Only need a few nails in place. I don't recommend staples because if you need to pop this wedge back out again, it's going to have a harder time getting the staples out. There we go. And that's ready to use too. And now the big question is, how do you get them to draw straight comb? Well, first, that comb guide is important. That's the first step. If you have a good comb guide, you're 90% there. The rest of it is just keeping an eye on what they're doing. At least once a week, you'll want to look in. You don't have to pull any frames out. Just look through the top, down between the bars, and see if the comb is still going straight. If you're starting to see a little bit of it go off track, you just take that piece out, and if this were crooked, I would cut it free from the top bar and just push it back into place. The comb, when the bees are using it, is really warm and soft and pliable, so it's really easy to just come in with a sharp knife or even your hive tool, separate the crooked part from the top bar and push it in nice and straight. You might do a little bit of damage to any brood that's up at the top or make a mess of some honey, but that's okay. It's actually better in the long run to get it taken care of early instead of making a big mess of it. And believe me, I've had my cases of big messes, and a little bit of maintenance is better than having to deal with the big messes. Another key is straight comb begets straight comb, meaning when you have already drawn out comb in the box, they tend to keep going in that same orientation and keep the same pattern. If your comb is getting a little crooked and you think maybe they'll fix it on their own, they don't. They actually make it worse. The next comb will follow the same pattern and sometimes start to magnify that turn and so on all the way down the box, and it just makes a mess of things. Let's have a little lesson on bee space. Bee space is 3/8 of an inch. And all of the boxes and frames in a Langstroth hive are built around this concept of bee space. 3/8 of an inch is the ideal gap where bees won't fill it with comb and they won't close it off with propolis. When bees build comb, the thickness of the comb is about an inch or 7/8 of an inch for brood comb, and the distance between the combs is about 1 3/8 of an inch. So on these frames, these end bars actually measure 1 3/8 of an inch, so that the center to center distance between the combs is always 1 3/8 of an inch. So Steve asked me one idea about getting straight comb. What about if you put an empty frame between two frames of foundation and create kind of a barrier and a pattern for them to follow? When you create an arrangement in the hive of an empty frame sandwiched on either side by foundation that doesn't have any drawn comb on it, you've created a gap that is 2 3/4 inches. The bees will see this as an opportunity to draw out 2 foundationless combs in between the frames, in between the top bars. They'll see the foundation as walls of a cavity, and they'll want to maximize the space for drawing out comb. If you have available to you some drawn comb, it's better to sandwich your empty frame between 2 frames of drawn comb instead of 2 pieces of foundation. That way they don't have that 2 3/4 inch gap that they'll want to fill. They'll have just enough space to draw out one perfectly straight piece of comb. This concept of bee space is also important when working in the hive, because when you're putting back your frames or when you're putting the boxes back together, if you have any gaps in between the frames, you'll want to make sure that you close those up. Get all the frames pushed together tightly so that there's shoulder to shoulder contact between the frames. And I like to center them in the box so that the distance and the gaps between the outer walls is about equivalent. This is to prevent any kind of excess of burr comb that they can build up in that gap. So that's how I work with foundationless frames. If you're enjoying these videos, please share them with a friend. Thanks for watching.